So thanks again for joining. For those who just joined, feel free to type in where you're dialing in from, what company you're joining from. And what I'm going to do is just skip the poll and really just like give the reason why we do these things. It's number one, to connect everyone with experts in our community so that they can actually show you innovative ways they use Sentry to solve their problems. While we help to build Sentry, we're by no means the expert, and your stories inspire us. And we love sharing those use cases with people so that they can learn from it. Number two, it's to familiarize folks with the newest features that we've released. Dustin will be showing today everyone hands-on on how to create custom dashboards, which is hopefully why you're here. And then lastly, we wanted to open it up for questions on either what Garrett is doing with Virta Health or questions about dashboards. And if you have any specific questions about your use case, ping me, and then we'll either find someone to answer that at the end or follow up with you. With that, I wanted to jump back and get started. Garrett, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then tell us a little bit why you guys started using Sentry and then your use case? Thanks.
Yeah, sorry if you've already heard some of this before. Like we said, I had started my introduction. My name is Garrett McCullough. I am a senior mobile engineer for Virta Health, and Virta Health is a telemedicine clinic for people with metabolic conditions. Primarily, we focus on people with type 2 diabetes, but we also deal with some other metabolic issues like obesity, type 1, and pre-diabetes. And the goal with Virta is that when a patient joins our program, they're assigned a health coach and a doctor, and we help them change their lifestyles, and with the goal that they can reduce or eliminate a lot of the medications that they're on safely, obviously. And so like a lot of the stories that we hear from our patients is that they're able to get off all of their medications. They lose 30 pounds, and they can play with their kids again or their grandkids. So the work is incredibly rewarding. I have a lot of diabetes in my family, so it's a personal passion of mine to help with this problem. The way that our patients interact with our service is mostly through a mobile app. And so primarily they're using their mobile app. They log in, they can log all of their things like their blood pressure, they can log their weight, they can chat with their health coach or doctor, and it's a very high touch service. So as patients are, for example, logging their blood sugar, our health coaches and doctors and everything are automatically getting updates about their patients that they're in charge of. And so performance is somewhat of an issue for us, but reliability and stability are major concerns. So we want, as high of reliability, crash-free rates as possible. Our mobile app is built using React Native. And so I thought today I could go ahead and talk about some of the ways that we use Sentry within Virta Health. We're actually using it across our entire stack. So we use a front end, back end, web, and on our React Native app. I only really work with the React Native app, so I can talk about that in great detail. Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with our back end, so I can't really speak to that very much. So let me just bring up my notes here. So one of the big things that I use Sentry for is with trying to diagnose errors that come in from specific users. And so, commonly we'll get someone will complain to their health coach about the app not working, or they'll complain in our community, or they may even log a Zendesk ticket. ideally the Zendesk ticket is hopefully how they do it, because that captures a lot of the details that we need. But it other, you know, if they just complain to their coach,
Basic stuff, create our website.
oh, I got some people unmuted. You know, then we can still work with that. And so one of the things that we'll do is that we'll get a user ID, you know, just like probably most people expect. And so if you come into the issues screen, the issues screen I find is really great for like looking at sort of broad classifications of errors. So you can see, you know, we got some errors, we got some warnings, that sort of stuff. Um, this is in our development environment, so there's a lot more errors in production. But if I look for like a particular user ID, so user ID 121, you know, I can see like, okay, look, they got some errors here. And then, oh, look, let me, you know, if I wanted to, I can dive in on this warning. This is a network request failing. But then when I do that, instead of coming into the specific error for that one particular user, I'm just thrown into sort of this general screen that shows all of the errors together and not that particular event for that user ID 121. So like this one doesn't even have a user ID attached to it as far as I can tell. So it's not particularly useful for diagnosing what happened to this one particular user. So instead, I like to come over here to the Discover tab. And so the Discover tab allows me to look at all events across all of our applications. And so I can, you know, narrow it down. We can get to just the iOS app in development. I can start to see like all of these events. But then it's really cool because it's got like some great you know, it's got some great power searches here that we can use. And so then when I look in here and I say, oh, let's see, oh, reference error. Yeah, that's a weird one. I can go ahead and when I drill in on this event, this is the exact thing that happened to that one particular user. And it gives me all of the context of like, you know, where, you know, I can see everything about this one user with that one event, and I can try and diagnose what exactly happened with that person, you know, in case it's like too generic of an error for me to otherwise figure out. So that's one of the big things that I like to do. But in a lot of cases, the you know, an error might occur before a user is logged in. And so if they haven't logged in yet, we don't have a user ID. So instead, in that case, what I would generally try and do is find out, you know, like what kind of phone they have, you know, what sort of thing. And so then I can start to go ahead and dive in on that thing, on that information. So I can see, you know, device is iOS. Now, the only thing here is that this is all case sensitive. So if you have a, you know, something, sorry, I'm just reading off my notes and I can't talk and type at the same time. So I can start to get pretty narrow. And once you start adding in, and this is particularly where like the Zendesk information comes in handy, because I can get all of these like minute details about the user's phone. But in that case, you know, I can narrow it down to like a very specific, you know, set of the information, and pretty much down to like, you know, maybe a handful of users. And from there, you know, once I get it down to a handful of users, then I can be like, oh, look, you know, here's that error that we were looking at earlier, the error in the send fetch, that network call. And then I can go ahead and this is for that particular user. And, you know, it's going to be much more specific to what happened in that instance. Cool. So that's one of the ways that I like to use the Discover tab. The other part.
Question for you.
Yeah, sure.
So, sorry for interrupting. Are you storing all of the errors that happen for every user?
Pretty much, yes. The only thing that we do is we do a little bit of filtering on the errors for there's we have a timeout that is really noisy, and so we will swallow the errors off of that timeout. Any other questions?
I have a question. So how do you like populate those search attributes? Is it part of the events that you're logging when?
Yeah, it's just all of those attributes are automatically recorded by our Sentry SDK. So I don't add any of those things. It captures those things. And then the discoverability for those, it's all of the tags. So like if I came in here and I just look at like an event, pretty much any of these tag details are going to be things that I could query off of. I think there's some that you can't, but most of the kind of the most important ones, so like, let's see, client, let's try this out. Going off script here, but yeah, so let's see, I could, so this is because it was running in my simulator, it's showing up as Mac OS 10. So, I can go ahead and pretty much anything that shows up in this event tag details, it seems like I can query off of. I think I found one time where I couldn't, but I don't remember off the top of my head what it was. And I think there's probably some like custom things that we could query off of, but I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, Garrett, I was about to add, it's worth mentioning that you can set custom tags via the SDK as well, and base your queries off of those. So if you have specific logic that you want to instrument as a developer, you can do that via the SDK in addition to what's already collected by default, which are the items you've been going through.
Yeah. Yeah, the standard attributes have always worked pretty well for me. So the next thing that I was going to share, so one of the things that I like is when you come in here on these error or these events, you can see this stack trace, which is really helpful. Our React Native app, all of the JavaScript, it's actually TypeScript that gets transpiled over to JavaScript, and then it all gets minified and bundled and blah blah blah. And so if you don't have the stack trace, it's kind of difficult. You're guessing based off of you'll see something like o.completions is not an object or whatever, and it's not very useful without the stack trace. And so one of the things that we went ahead and did is so that we could get those stack traces, we added the upload to we upload our source maps to Sentry automatically during our build process. So we're using a tool called Fastlane. Fastlane is mostly used for building mobile apps and React Native apps, and it provides a number of tools for doing things automatically, like submitting your app to the App Store or building your Android app using Gradle, all sorts of stuff like that. And so we go ahead and they actually have a tool called Upload Sources to Sentry, and so I can I specify my my project, the name of the file, the code push, and everything. And so we're using code push. And code push does something that's a little bit funny, where it the code push, the bundle ID for code push gets registered in Sentry using a different like a unique identifier. It's the SHA for the last commit that created the code push bundle or something along those lines. But anyways, suffice it to say that the bundle ID changes based on whether they're using a code push bundle or whether they're using the app straight out of the App Store. So we need to do a little bit of extra work, and what that involves is just taking the release name, the app's name and then the release version, and then appending a code push with the SHA ID. And then when we upload those, it comes over to the source maps things, and then you can see where we have, both the version with the code push ID, and there's a version without the code push ID. And that way, no matter, which version of the app that they're using, whether it's from the App Store directly or whether it was updated via the code push, we still are able to get those nice source maps. The final thing that I'll mention was something that we were talking about before we got started here, and it's a sort of a tricky performance issue that we've started diagnosing. And so we've started using the Sentry performance tool and we're hoping to instrument this and figure it out. And so it's a really weird bug. It only affects very particular Android devices. Luckily, there is one person in our entire company that has a phone that's affected by this bug. And what it is that when the app starts up, the very first call to our API will time out. But then if you manage to get past that, all subsequent API calls happen perfectly fast, just as we'd expect. And calls to other APIs like, Google, whatever, all of those will happen immediately also. And so we've been trying to figure this out. And so we just recently implemented two things. We're doing the Sentry performance monitoring. And so we're going to try and see if that helps to figure out what's going on. But then we're also going ahead and we're adding, in a try catch sort of situation, if the call fails, then we do a whole bunch of testing to make sure their device is online. We've checked to make sure that a bunch of different endpoints are reachable, and then we're going to log that in like a Sentry capture message or capture exception or something like that. And we'll just log all of that extra data about whether those other endpoints are reachable, whether, what endpoint were they trying to hit, all of those types of things, and see if we can finally nail down this thing, because it has been the most difficult problem I think any of us have ever worked on. And I think that's about it for me. Did anyone have any questions before I shut up?
No, that was really great. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before we move to Dustin's presentation?
Yeah, I have one. Thank you very much, Garrett. It was great. I'm wondering if you could share anything about your processes around events management. Like, how do you know when something new happens? How do you ignore stuff that has been in production for a while?
That's actually been a pretty big challenge, and I'm still trying to figure out the best solution for that. We are using a navigation library called React Native Navigation, and the problem that we're coming across is that it's very noisy and it generates a ton of errors, but you can't ignore them very easily because it adds a unique identifier into the error message, and so every error message is like a one-off error message because it contains like a I think it's a hexadecimal number or something like that. And so we're struggling right now. Like I mostly have like all of the error messages or whatever, like the default error message reporting coming to my email inbox. And it's way too much. I need to figure out how to turn it down a little bit. We do have some client-side filtering that we're using right now, like I mentioned before, with the set timeout that when some of our messages time out, they were getting double reported in Sentry. And so we do some filtering on that. And it's like a, error is abort error or whatever, that kind of logic. And then other things, there's just some things that, I, through experience and working with the application for a while, I know that they're going to occur and that, we're not going to work on them now. And so then I just go in and manually ignore them. The problem that I've seen there is that every time you release a new version of the app, your ignores are lost. And so then you need to go back in and re-ignore a bunch of errors for or warnings or whatever. So yeah, that's definitely something that I have struggled with a bit, and I still need to spend some time figuring out a better solution.
Cool. Dustin, do you have any answers, or should we move on?
I don't know if I have anything specific to add, given just a little lack of visibility on the actual errors being received, but I will say it sounds like Garrett's at least on the right track. Currently, he's got some client side. It sounds like before send filters enabled, which maybe we might be able to improve upon depending on what we're looking for specifically in the error message. And it sounds like you're also using client side error message filtering at the project level. So Garrett, we're always happy to have those conversations with you and anyone. So feel free to contact us with further detail on that as you work through it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll reach out at some point. Thank you.
I was going to say, I'm actually on Garrett's team, and
Hey!
we tried doing, hey Garrett, good job, by the way. We tried doing issue grouping at one point, and I struggled with that. Like I got things to group, but I couldn't get new messages to show up in the group. It was only like ones that had already appeared. And I'm wondering if I did that wrong, if issue grouping would be a way to go in this case.
Issue grouping, it depends what your goal is. So if your goal is to not have these noisy React Native library errors crowd your issue stream, you might want, it sounds like you want to include them in the issue stream. So perhaps grouping might be helpful in this case if you're noticing just an abundance of these that are happening due to that unique identifier. So it could very well be that we need to look into how you're using grouping for these particular issues if you are still interested in seeing them in your issue stream and triaging them accordingly.
Yeah, it was different errors, but it was kind of the same idea where we were getting like a unique phone number in every error. And so.
Yeah, there's definitely some things that we can look into related to handling these unique values and how these values are creating perhaps issues for you in filtering and in grouping.
Thanks.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks again, Garrett. And then with that, I think let's move on to Dustin's hands-on presentation. So for everyone here who's dying to try this out, feel free to log into Sentry right now and navigate to your dashboards. You should all have access. If not, ping me and maybe we can help you start a trial. Or there's also a sandbox link, which I sent this morning. So ping me if you have any questions running into that. And then with that, the floor is yours, Dustin.
Awesome, thanks, Catherine. Just a quick check that everyone can see my screen really quickly.
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome. So big thanks to Garrett for sharing those amazing use cases when it comes to applying Sentry for debugging complex issues, not only with errors, but also it seems to be related to performance features as well. And we're going to sort of continue that theme here as to how we can leverage Sentry and take advantage of Sentry to navigate performance data and errors data across all of our projects. As we sort of bring this into the conversation around the new feature within Sentry, which is dashboards. So you can think of dashboard as a general way to capture at a high level the overall health of an application. So dashboards are going to allow you to memorialize metrics that are central to your team's workflow, whether that's for reporting purposes, weekly stand-ups, or anything in between, and also help you navigate performance and error data across all of your projects. So our goal today is going to be to create our own dashboard from scratch and hopefully replicate a handful of the widgets that you see in front of you right now. And it's also our hope that this session be more interactive. So as Kathy mentioned, if folks can take a second to log into their Sentry accounts, navigate to the dashboards panel, and join me on this screen, we can start we can start to build live together and hopefully address any questions that come up generally as we start creating some of these widgets for ourselves. But while folks, I give everyone a second to get to the dashboards section, I'll give a general overview of what we're looking at right now. So all of the aggregated data that you're seeing in front of you currently is coming from either, is either being collected by default via Sentry SDKs or collected as a function of instrumentation that you as a developer have decided to add for additional metadata via the SDK as well. Any of the information you see within these widgets is also going to be dependent on the global filters you have set. So these filters usually appear at the top of the screen. So for instance, if I were to change this, looking over the last 7 days, my widget should update accordingly. If I were to change this to look at more projects than that's the zoom bar. If I were to change this to look at more projects than we are looking at currently, it should update as well. So yes, all of these widgets are also interactive. So if you were to hover over a particular time slice and select it, all of them should update accordingly to reflect that similar slice of time and the data that was collected and stamped with that timestamp from the Sentry SDK. Okay, so I'm going to assume that everyone, or at least most of everyone, is joined us here in the dashboards. Let's start creating our own dashboard within Sentry. And we're going to do that by clicking on Create Dashboard. So this brings us to a brand new dashboard, and I'm going to name this. So I'll just call this a Lunch and Learn. Oh, okay. I'll just call this Lunch and Learn for now. Let's spell it out. Spell it out correctly, hopefully. Lunch and Learn. Save it. So now we have our dashboard. Let's create our first widget. So I'm going to click on that plus sign. We have a nice helpful modal here, add widget. And the first thing we're going to do is name the widget. So let's just say that we're interested in total errors across all of our projects for the past 7 days. So we'll name this total errors. And we'll next move into visualizations. So Sentry gives you a bunch of helpful visualizations for whatever data source you decide and whatever query you decide to represent with a widget. And we're going to choose big number for now. So right now, this is going to give us a total count across all of our data for events that have arrived within the last 7 days. And what we want to focus on using our Discover language here is telling Sentry exactly what event type we want to include as part of this count. So we're going to say event type transaction is something that we're not interested in here. So we're using this bang symbol here. We're going to click on this, and you can see that Sentry's now pared down our data to only be focused on error data for this particular big number. The last thing that you need to do is just click Add Widget. We'll save and finish for now. And voila, congratulations. You've now, well, this may be the first widget you've ever created, but congratulations nonetheless. We've created our first widget in Sentry dashboards. Take a quick pause there. See if there's any questions right off the bat. Otherwise, this one was fairly straightforward. Perhaps you're interested in a more granular overview of your error data across the last 7 days. So we're going to add another widget to our dashboard. Click Edit Dashboard, Add Widget. And this time we're going to look at the top issues across all of our projects across the last 7 days. And a particularly helpful visualization for this is going to be table. So now we're not so concerned with paring our data down. We're going to be more concerned with the columns that we want to include in our table. So what do we want to group by here? We're going to use a field within Sentry called issue. So issues, as events come into Sentry, they're grouped as unique issues based on our grouping algorithm. I won't go into depth on that now. I'm happy to provide follow-up detail on how we group events into issues. But another helpful column here might be project. So we're interested in the top issues, and we want to know what projects those issues are coming from. So we can get a nice preview of our table down below here. So we can get the top issues. Well, currently these aren't top issues, but we'll get to that in a second. By project, by count. The last thing we want to do is sort by count descending. So now we have a helpful view of the top issues by error count across all of our projects across the last 7 days within Sentry. All we need to do now is click Add Widget, save and finish. And now When we navigate the dashboards, we have a nice convenient overview of the top issues across the last 7 days, by environment, if you want to change that, by certain project, that we can start a triage process from, or just communicate more widely to our general team. I'm going to pause there, see if there's any questions on creating the top issues table before we move on.
There is one about whether or not query supports JQ-like syntax.
Sorry, Kathy, could you repeat that? JQ-like syntax? I'm not sure.
Brandon, did you want to unmute yourself? And oh, okay, it looks like Rohit got it.
Okay, thanks, Rohit. Awesome. So let's move on. I'm going to create a new tab and just preserve our old dashboard because I want to show perhaps a potential workflow that can spawn from one of your widgets. So you're looking at your top issues, and if you're ever interested in a more comprehensive list of issues or drilling down into a particular project in which you see these problematic issues, you can do so, and you can always open up these table widgets within Discover, which is what we're going to do now. So Garrett showed off Discover already. It's a really convenient way to navigate across the metadata across all of your projects that Sentry collects by default or that you've configured as a developer. And now we're within the Discover tool, and we're looking at the full list of issues across the last 7 days across all of our projects. So now we can get a good idea of the full breadth of our issues that are occurring within our organization or within projects that we're responsible for. And if we are curious about top issues within particular projects, we can start to drill down on some of these by adding them to our filters. So let's add this Flask Cloud project to our filtering. Okay, so now we can see in the query bar here, we've added the project. We can see top issues within this project. And I know personally this is a backend project, so this is where you can start to slice and dice the data to whatever level of specificity best fits the sophistication that you're interested in or your team is interested in by changing up columns. So columns are where you can enter fields that are collected by Sentry by default or tags that you've configured as a developer. For instance, right now, I want to see how these error counts break down across URLs or endpoints. So I've switched up what we're grouping on here, and now I can check into particular endpoints and the issue count associated with them. I can also add unique users impacted or unique users associated with these events. Perhaps the checkout is a key KPI I'm interested in or that my team is responsible for. You can continue to add layers of metadata to your filters and get as specific as you want. And now we're actually looking at this particular endpoint, and perhaps we're interested in slicing and dicing further by looking at handled versus unhandled errors here. Or even, as Garrett kind of looked at, we can look at error values and see how counts group accordingly. You can go from a very general level in your dashboard to getting very specific within Discover to go from perhaps something that you've reflected on as a team to exploring it individually or getting to the bottom of outliers in your data sources as they're collected by Sentry. One other workflow I wanted to mention that can spawn from this. So whether you want to track aggregated data or errors that are coming into this endpoint, or you want to track how a fix that you've instrumented is tracking over time, you can do so by setting metric alerts from these Discover queries. So really quickly, we want to tell Sentry what type of events we want to use for our data source. And I'll update that accordingly. And the last thing you want to do is add the project to your global filter. Doing these two things is going to allow you to click create alert. And now you're within the metric alerts interface, and you can sort of get a general idea of what the counts look like over time. You can adjust this window if you want to check out how the trend changes, but you can also start setting more filters based on your environment. We're already using the event type error. We're focused in this project on this particular endpoint. One of the last things you need to do is set the shifting window that's going to be evaluated every minute. So Sentry is going to look back every 15 minutes. So at 3 p.m., for instance, we're looking back between 2:45 and 3 p.m. At 3:01, 2:46 and 3:01 to see if any of the thresholds you specify have been breached. So here we can specify some fictitious thresholds quickly for critical status, warning status. You can get a nice visualization here of those statuses as they correspond to your counts over time. And the last thing you want to do is add the actions that you want when these thresholds are breached. So this defaults to emailing a team or members of your team. for critical and warning statuses, or you can leverage Sentry's robust integration platform and add alerts depending on other platforms that that are a part of your team's workflow. So Slack, PagerDuty, Microsoft Teams, there's a number of platforms that we support and that are fully enumerated in our documentation. Click Save Rule, and now you're going to be alerted to thresholds as they're breached. And I will also mention we've done a lot of work improving the UI of alerts, and now you'll have comprehensive histories in the alert section of Sentry that are going to sort of capture when these alerts were breached, which ones for how long, and a bunch of other project associated metadata that's going to be super helpful for you when it comes to tracking alerts. Before I get too deep in this workflow, I'm going to jump back into dashboards where we'll finish up with the third widget, but I guess this is another good place to pause to see if there's any questions on that general pathway that we kind of just followed from widgets into Discover into metric alerts.
I just had a quick question about the environments in the metric alerts. Is there a way to select multiple environments, or do you have to create the metric per environment if there are multiple environments?
So you can choose all, but it seems, at least this dropdown is indicative that it's specifying a single environment. It seems like the split there is all versus single environment. So you would have to create that metric alert for an individual environment if you're looking to do it for different, if you're not looking to have the general sort of all specified there. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. So, oops, let's go back to our dashboards here.
I have a quick question, actually.
Yeah.
For the metric creation process, what type of queries can you put into the metric itself? Like when you're setting up sort of like the filtering,
Yeah.
like I guess how extensive is the querying?
So those queries can include any fields that are collected by Sentry by default, any fields that you as a developer have added via our tags feature. I think a good place to really get a full sense of the breadth of the queries that are possible are our docs. So any Discover query language should be applicable there. I'm wondering, there's a bunch of different things that can be, but I'd say that the docs are a great place to get a good idea of the full breadth of possibilities there. But really anything that you configure via the SDK, via tags, or that we collect generally as fields should be available there. I didn't know if you had something specific in mind, but there's a number of things that are possible in those queries.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the final dashboards that I wanted to create, or that I had planned to create, or widgets rather, is going to be related to performance data. So we mentioned that Sentry dashboards can be used, or I don't know if we mentioned it, but Sentry dashboards can be used to navigate both error and performance data within Sentry across all of your projects. And we've kind of left performance out of our widget so far. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware that this data is also applicable when it comes to creating widgets. So let's do that right now. So for this particular dashboard, we're going to be interested in something like key performance or key page or KPI performance. So what we're trying to do here is capture a key KPI or a key page and performance related metadata around that page that my team is responsible for maintaining to a certain level, or just generally responsible for overall performance related to a particular user flow or a particular KPI of interest. And for this, we're going to use our area chart. So within Sentry, within the Sentry SDKs, depending on platform, but for many platforms, we enable developers, or we give developers the option to instrument manually performance or tracing within your code base. And as part of that manual instrumentation, we allow you to add metadata to transactions. So in this case, we have chosen a checkout flow within our demo, and we have manually instrumented a transaction with the title or with the name checkout. So this is on our front end. And what this is going to do is this is going to aggregate data for us around performance characteristics for that particular checkout flow that our users are experiencing. And now we can start to add performance profiles here, or percentiles, in addition to other metadata around duration that are particularly valuable to our team and to the KPI that we're interested in here. So we're looking at latency percentiles here, P95, P75, P50 for transactions for this particular checkout flow on our front end. So here, at a quick glance, once we save and add this widget, let me just make sure we have everything we want. Looks like we do. Add widget, save and finish. So now across the last 24 hours, or even across the last 7 days, we can get a sense of how generally the performance, the relevant latency percentiles look for this particular transaction around checkouts for our users. We can actually even highlight spikes that we see in these latencies, start zooming in depth into those specifically, and even maybe drawing loose correlations depending on what other widgets we have here. It seems like we do have a front end issue. The frequency isn't that high for this particular time frame, but these are outliers we're talking about here. So the correlations might not be terribly strong, but this is just one example of how you can start maybe looking across widgets to draw loose correlations by zooming into a particular performance issue that we observed or that we've instrumented manually in this case with the Sentry SDK in a front-end project. That concludes a majority of the widgets I had planned to replicate. I'm open to hearing from folks on how their widget building experience was, or just general questions related to anything that you've seen so far. Okay, I will say that you have options depending on your role. So, we've talked a lot from the developer perspective. If this is coming from more of a PM role, you can always edit these to reflect, like if you've instrumented a new feature and you've instrumented Sentry's performance to monitor particular characteristics of that feature, you can always get a sense of perhaps unique users that are associated with a particular endpoint. So if we were to look at, if we were to count unique users, maybe you're interested in user adoption. Let's just see if this will work. You can sort of get a sense, depending on what visualization you choose, of, well, this is going to be for this particular time point or this time slice, but general feature adoption. So feature adoption when it comes to this checkout flow that perhaps is new that you've instrumented, or you can even update this to reflect feature adoption over time, perhaps in a bar chart. You can look at this over time as well, based on counting unique users. So depending on your role, there are a number of different applications for dashboards and for widgets within Sentry across your team.
Cool. Hey, Dustin, Kyoshi had a question about whether or not the select and zoom updating workflow also works for non-performance widgets. I believe the answer is yes, but I'll let you answer that.
Yes, that you are correct, Kathy. Yep, performance, non-performance, any visualization of data generally. So if I don't know if you might have noticed, but the top issues table updates as well. Yeah, on any of those zooms.
Excellent. And then here's a kind of a curveball. Can Sentry be used for any security use cases?
Security use cases. The one that jumps off the top of my head is content security policies. So it can be used to track those violations and breaches in those. I'm not sure if that is the kind of security we're talking about here, but I'm sure we're always happy to elaborate on that either offline, or if you have more color to add to that in the chat. I'm sure there are plenty of folks that would be interested in helping out with that answer.
Yeah, Brandon just mentioned you can filter on like sensitive values, etc.
Yes, the PII, there are options for filtering on PII if that's what we're talking about.
Great, and then I'm gonna, there's another question, and I can't pronounce your name, Boldo Dimmer, whether or not in the dashboard, whether or not you can change the width of the widget.
That's a good question. Let's see if we can. I know that the widths might dynamically adjust. Maybe there's someone on the dashboards team here, dashboards dev, that can better speak to it. But it seems like, at least in this edit screen, I cannot right now. but I know that the sizing, this might be like a adjust based on flex. So I haven't looked into the underlying code for that, but my preliminary answer right now is it looks like they adjust automatically for you. So it might not be an option currently, but we can always look into that and get back to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dustin. That was really great. And thanks everyone for attending.